and is granted permission from the king to return and rebuild the walls of the city of Jerusalem. And so Nehemiah is remembered for rebuilding the city itself, rebuilding the city walls. But as you look at that, you realize that that whole storyline didn't happen in a couple of weeks or a few months. We're talking about a considerable amount of time in coming back from captivity and in getting the temple built and then finally getting the walls of the city built. It was a long time. From 536, so here's the time frame between the first return and Nehemiah getting the city walls rebuilt, and we're looking at almost 90 years it took to get that all done. Okay, so that's just sort of a timeline picture of the return from captivity. We had this chart up a few weeks ago too, and we want to remind you that we are looking at this king, this Persian king, Artaxerxes, who is the one who authorized Ezra and Nehemiah in the second and third returns from captivity. Artaxerxes. What else? One other thing. I'll leave this chart up here. Here's sort of a very crude drawing of the walls of the city of Jerusalem. And we're going to talk about Nehemiah now has come back. He has surveyed the situation. Remember when we were studying last week in chapter 2 that he went out in the night to survey the walls of the city of Jerusalem to see what the situation really was. And then he called on the people to get busy and get to work. And so they did. You know, one of the things that we often remember about Nehemiah is that he was a really effective leader. In fact, you may have in times past heard lessons preached about Nehemiah's leadership methodologies, his qualities as a great leader. And he's often studied in that regard, and he really was. As we're going to see, they're going to get all this work done. There's a lot of work to do, and they're going to get it all done in 52 days, less than 2 months, to get all the city walls rebuilt. Really an amazing feat that was accomplished. Now, chapter 3 is an interesting chapter, and it's one of those chapters that you almost tremble to have to read and pronounce all the names, because the whole chapter, Nehemiah chapter 3, is a listing of various men and those who worked with them in rebuilding different sections of the walls of Jerusalem. I think it's kind of interesting, and this may be one of the points that you'd want to make about Nehemiah's leadership. He didn't just throw it out to rebuild the walls, and everybody just started in willy-nilly, just going about, throwing up stuff at random. Actually, it seems that different groups of people under various leaders of the people were assigned specific sections of the wall in order to get it built. So I don't think we're going to read all these names and all this list, but let's just start in chapter 3, verse 1 of Nehemiah. Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brethren, the priests, and they builded the sheep gate. They sanctified it and set up the doors of it, even unto the tower of Meah. They sanctified it unto the tower of Hanael. And so, one of the things that I think is kind of interesting is we go through this chapter. Right here's the sheep gate, and you're going to notice that all of these different places won't be mentioned in chapter 3. But when you get to the end of chapter 3, they're going to be back to the sheep gate. And so it's going to sort of progress us around the city with the various ones who are working. And so the accounting of it starts and ends at the sheep gate. Here's that tower, Hananel. They built. So this is typical in this chapter. They built from the sheep gate to this tower. So that was the section that was accomplished by this Eliashib, the high priest, and his brethren. So there's just one side. They didn't go about to try to contribute to every square inch of the wall, but they had a section, and they committed to the section, and they got their work done. By the way, I thought that this was interesting. By most accounts, the circumference of the city and the walls was 1.7 miles. So obviously the city wasn't that long top to bottom, or certainly not that wide side to side, but the circumference of the city by most accounts was estimated to be 1.7 miles. Now that's a lot of wall if you stop to think about it. And if you stop to think about the people who were doing it, and they would not have had modern equipment, this would have been all hard physical labor. So that'd been quite an assignment, and Nehemiah is leading them to get that done, and they did well. Verse 2, chapter 3, verse 2, next to him builded the men of Jericho, and next to them builded Zaccur, the son of Imri. But the fish gate did the sons of Hasinaiah built, who also laid the beams thereof, and set up the doors thereof, and the locks thereof, and the bars thereof. All right, so here is the fish gate. So the way chapter 3 is reading is a progression of the various ones who built, going in counterclockwise progression. All right, let's just read a couple more of these. Hard names to pronounce. Next to them repaired Merimoth, the son of Urijah, the son of Koz. Next to them repaired Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, the son of Misha Abiel. And next to them repaired Zadok, the sons of Baanah. And next to them the Tekoites repaired. But their nobles put not their backs or their necks to the work of their Lord. I wanted to include that verse 5 in particular. Couple of things. All this listing of names, what does it mean anyway? Why would we need to know that? All this listing of names of men whose names we can't even pronounce very well. Why is it taking up space in our Bibles to list all these individuals? Monty, what you thinking on that?
I think part of it was because the Jews that was going to come after these people could have a sense of national pride that this is my relatives that done this work right here.
Okay.
So it gave some significance to them, maybe helped motivate them to stay faithful to the Lord. I think it shows us that God is aware of what we're doing, and when we follow Him, these people, they didn't do it so they'd get their name written in scriptures, but God, you might say, rewarded them by putting their names in there. Here we are, 2,500, 3,000 years later, we still read about the work these people did. It was important to God to do that, but it lets us also know that He's aware of what we're doing. And when we serve Him, it's not without reward. Maybe the reward's strictly spiritual in the next life, but He's aware of it. He's keeping account of it, because if He could have it written down here and preserved, He's still got it in His book of life in heaven. He knows what we're doing.
I think you're right. I like the first point you made that I really hadn't thought about it. There would have been some encouragement, some positive example set for the descendants of these people. Now, to us, these people are pretty much just names on a page. We don't know anything about them. But for several generations after this, their names would have been remembered by their near descendants, and that would have served as a very positive example in their family and the generations that progressed down their families. That's a good thing. I think the point we make is the one that Monty made, is God knows. God knows your work. He knows what you do. And He could write a book like this about the work of the College View congregation, and He could name every one of us, and say, so-and-so did this and that, and so-and-so did the next, and so-and-so did after that. He knows, as well as God knew these people, their names and what they did, He knows us, He knows our names, He knows what we do. And that's really significant. I mean, we are not sort of a nameless mass of people in the estimation of God. We are individuals known and identified before the very God of heaven. And that is incredible. That is really incredible. And so it's nice to know that God knows your name and He knows what you do and He cares about it. It's also a little scary, God knows your name, and He knows what you do, and He knows what you don't do. And that's the point there in verse 5. These Tekoites repaired a section of the wall. We're going to read later in the chapter, they even took on to repair another section of the wall. But their nobles put not their necks to the work of their Lord. I've always thought, man, Monty, you just mentioned about their names being mentioned in Scripture. How would you like your name to be mentioned like this? These guys were lazy sluggards. The Tekoites got busy working, but their nobles were bums, and they wouldn't join in the work. How would you like your name to be written that way? But, again, bringing it to us, would God say that about us? So God's writing a book about the work of the College View congregation. And He would name so-and-so did this, so-and-so did this, so-and-so did this. But so-and-so was lazy and wouldn't engage. How He could do that, couldn't he? He knows us that well. Wait.
So I guess my perception of your question that you just asked a while ago was the names of the places, the walls, the gates of the walls. Why did you put that on there? And I wasn't thinking about the people.
No, I was thinking about the people when I asked that question, but go ahead.
But, the Mormons next to us, they have about 3 or 4 books. And all the places are made up. You can't go back and look and say, oh, there was a city called Jerusalem. Or, but in the Scriptures, you could, and they've done a lot of construction, or I said construction, but they've done a lot of archaeological findings and stuff. And you can go back and you can see that all this stuff was how it was back then.
Yeah.
And names of places and geographical areas and maps and stuff. These are all, you can go back and find them. To me, that shows accuracy in the Scriptures. It shows
exactly
that
right.
the Scripture is coming from God, not man.
Yeah, and there's some really significant quotes by archaeologists who point out that, of course, there's been a tremendous amount of archaeological work done in the so-called Bible lands, and there's never been any archaeological discovery that contradicted something that the Scripture says. In fact, they all tend to prove and verify what the Scriptures say.
And even if they did contradict it, later on they come back and went, oh, I guess the Bible was right because they found something else, verified it.
Exactly right. James?
It seems like it also proves the authenticity of the Scriptures or the inspiration. Why would, if this was a made-up book or just fiction, who would take the time to enter these names in of people and their ancestors and all this? It's not a good read, right? It's not there for literary value. It's also seems like he knows the people, and we're proving that this is accurate.
Yeah.
We're naming all these people.
That's a good point. I never had thought about that, but that's a good point. I mean, if I'm just writing this just because I'm going to make something up, why would I include chapter 3? I think that's a really good point. That's sort of a backdoor or subtle sign of inspiration. I think you're right. Anything else? Anybody? All right. Again, all these people named, all the sections of the wall they built. It's going to mention the furnace tower. It's going to mention the dung gate, the fountain gate. And it does seem to progress very much in this counterclockwise methodology. And when you get to skip down to verse 27. And again, it's just all the same over and over and over again with hard names to pronounce. But in verse 27, after them the Tekoites repaired another piece over against the great tower that lieth out even to the wall of Ophel. So those Tekoites, even though their nobles seemed to be lazy bums, they were hard workers. And so they built one section, they took it on themselves to build another section of wall. Verse 28 mentions the horse gate. Look at the end of verse 29, there's the east gate. But look at verse 32. Between the going up of the corner and to the sheep gate repaired the goldsmiths and the merchants. And so there's the sheep gate mentioned again, and you come full circle. You've gone all the way around the wall of Jerusalem there in chapter 3. Any thoughts or comments? Anybody else have? All right. I'm just personally intrigued by the idea that just as well as God wrote those people, their names and their deeds, he could write the same thing about us, for good or for bad. And that, I mean, if you spend any time thinking about that, that's either a good thing and you feel comforted, but it could be a bad thing if we're laying out and not doing our job. You know, the fact of the matter is God knows what you do. And if you're doing good things, you don't have to sound your horn. You don't have to toot your own trumpet. God's not going to miss out on it if you are doing good. He knows. On the other hand, if you're not doing what you ought to do, there's really no use trying to offer excuses, because he knows perfectly what you should be doing and haven't been doing. And so all that goes together. Wade, you have no thought?
Yeah, I was just thinking, Jerusalem, it's kind of a weird structure for a city if you look at the layout. But I think it was probably because Jerusalem was built on a hill.
On 7 hills, actually, yeah.
Yeah. And so this is probably the kind of
Following the terrain.
Following the terrain. But later on, it's going to be expanded later on.
Yeah.
But initially, I think that's what he did. He kind of
Yeah,
just followed the terrain there and built it, because it does looks really weird
Yeah.
the way it is.
Sort of looks like a deformed peanut or something. James?
Jerusalem was actually bigger before the captivity. This is what was originally part of Jerusalem, the city of David down below, and then the temple now.
Yeah, there was
there was an extension. They didn't do the whole exterior.
Yeah,
of the city.
as you point out, the city that before it was conquered by Nebuchadnezzar actually encompassed more than just these walls did when they rebuilt them. Carol?
I noticed it was interesting that all these men that are mentioned that helped rebuild the walls. In verse 12, it says that Shalom helped repair a section with his daughters.
Yeah, isn't that cool? Yeah, that is really good. No, did you all hear what Carol mentioned there? Verse 12, next to him repaired Shalom, the son of Halomhesh, the ruler of the half part of Jerusalem, he and his daughters. So I think Carol makes a really interesting observation. Some of the women joined in, and they got acknowledged as well. Very good, very good. Okay, all right, so they're going about the building of the walls. So we already talked about a couple of guys at the end of chapter 2, people of the land, not Jews, who weren't happy about Jerusalem being rebuilt. So let's look at chapter 4, verse 1. It says, it came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth and took great indignation and mocked the Jews. And he spake before his brethren in the army of Samaria and said, what do these feeble Jews? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? Now Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, even that which they build, if a fox go up, he shall break down their stone wall. So the question was asked, if you're looking at your study guide, I'm down to question 16. What were the two methods used by Sanballat to discourage the Jews from building? Well, the first method we just read about is mocking and derision, ridicule. And I've always thought that what Tobiah said, really, I mean, you talk about a put down. If a fox goes up on this wall, it'll fall down. Well, and he uses the fox, I think, intentionally, because you think of a fox being very light-footed. If you ever see a fox in the wild, I mean, they're just barely touching the ground, it seems like. They're walking very lightly. And they're not a big animal at that. And so Tobiah says, oh, man, if a fox goes up on this wall, it'll fall over. And so that's a put down. That's an intentional insult to try and discourage them from their work of building. So mockery, ridicule, derision. That still happens. I mean, and it always has happened. It's not that it happened then, and then there was a long time when nobody ever did such a thing as that, and now they're starting to do that again in our day. No, the opponents of God and His people have always done that, and they continue to do that to this day. as Christians, we can expect that. We should expect that. The faithful people serving God have always experienced that sort of mockery. We shouldn't be surprised when it happens to us. And so that was the first thing they did. And then the second thing, skip down to verse 8. It says, they conspired all of them together to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it. And so just the physical abuse and the mocking was one thing. It may have had some effect. Maybe you could get them to stop by just making fun of them. Doesn't seem like they're going to stop. So now you threaten physical violence. In other words, he escalates the opposition. That happens today too. So what about us? And I really think when we're studying these historical accounts of God's people, we need to see how that might impact us. Have you ever been made fun of for being a Christian? Well, I imagine you have. Most of us have. People. I think particularly young people are prone to be mocked. Oh yeah, you're a Christian. Yeah, you're goody two shoes. That's hurtful, and unfortunately, that can cause some people to kind of throw up their hands and quit just because they don't want to experience that kind of ridicule. But if that doesn't work, then through the ages, there's been this escalation to threats and physical violence. We've been honestly, we've been free from that in our lifetimes. I don't think any of us here could say that we've ever had to physically suffer for the cause of Christ. But, and we always say this, what if it did come to such as that? It could. I mean, if we were physically threatened, if we were physically harmed because we were serving God, we wouldn't be the first ones to ever experience that. That's been a common plight of God's faithful people through the ages. And so I think that we need to be preparing ourselves for the potential of that if it ever would come. Always you don't want to wait till the moment of crisis to decide what you're going to do in a crisis. You want to get yourself ready ahead of time. And I think this is something we need to be thinking about, praying about. We've mentioned in the last few years, it seems like pretty scary times, increasingly scary times. Wicked people are pursuing a wicked agenda. And so what if they did? What if they did begin to physically threaten and then maybe physically harm us when we're serving God? We got to be determined. And so that determination needs to be in our hearts now, so that if it ever did happen, we're not going to wait till the crisis to decide how we're going to handle the crisis, is the point I'm trying to make. Any thoughts or comments? Anybody? All right. So, what did Nehemiah do? What was the response? And again, great leadership on the part of Nehemiah. Verse 4. Hear, O God, hear, O our God, for we are despised, and turn their reproach on their own head, and give them for a prey in the land of captivity. And cover not their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out from before thee, for they have provoked thee to anger before the builders. So built we the wall, and all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. But it came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah, the Arabians and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites, heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up, and that the breaches began to be stopped, then they were very wroth, and conspired all of them together to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it. So, the first reaction to this threat and crisis was to engage in prayer. And that's a really important thing for us to note. That's an important tool for us to use when we're under threat, when we're being challenged, when there's opposition to what we're trying to do in the cause of Christ. certainly prayer is an appropriate reaction to that. And Nehemiah led them in that prayer. But they kept working too. Notice verse 6, so we built the wall. The wall was joined together into the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. Prayer needs to be accompanied by action. You know, so if I'm praying for something that's seemingly very important in my life, that's good, but I also need to be busy acting and working toward the end that I'm praying for. And so the people were led by Nehemiah were praying for the progress of their work in building the walls of the city of Jerusalem. But they didn't just stand back and say, well, you know, I was here yesterday and the day before and nothing's happened here. I mean, I've been sitting here watching and there hadn't been one stone moved. It's just where it was. That's not what they did, right? They prayed and they worked. And I really like the expression there at the end of verse 6, they had a mind to work. You know, a lot of the success in working anything is your attitude toward the work. I can remember when I was a kid, we had a pretty big lot at our house, and we didn't have no riding lawnmowers. We had 2 little push mowers. And I can remember my dad would say when he's going off to work, boys, I want that grass mowed when I get home from work today. Oh man, it just went all through me. I hated that so bad. And it made the work so much. I just was grousing and grumbling, talking under my breath the whole time when I had to mow my part of the yard. It made the work so much harder because I didn't have a mind to work, right? If you have a mind to work, if you have the enthusiasm for what you're trying to do, you can do so much more. And we ought to have that mind to work for God. Wade?
You know, one of the things that I think that helps in that aspect is when you see progress being made. And so they're watching the wall and they're seeing it, you know, going up.
It's halfway up.
It's halfway up and stuff is starting to close.
The breaches are closed.
You know what we do here out here on the bulletin board out here, we put all those preachers' names and stuff, and you know, we're putting the things that we're doing and including it in the signs and stuff. That's helpful to us because now we can see that things are being done, progress is being made, and it makes you have more of a mind to want to do things.
I think you're right. Okay. Now, not only did they pray about it and continue working, but notice verse 9. It says, nevertheless, we made our prayer to God and set a watch against them day and night because of them. So again, they didn't just step back and sit down and pray to God and for God to take care of this without any of their involvement. They kept working and they took the precautions to set a watch. In other words, these people have threatened to attack us. What do you do when you're under the threat of an army attacking? Well, you set a watch. You set watchmen to watch for them if they might be approaching in an attack mode. And so they set a watch. Keep reading. Verse 10. Judah said, the strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed, and there is much rubbish, so that we're not able to build the wall. And our adversaries said, they shall not know neither see till we come in and in the midst of them and slay them and cause the work to cease. And it came to pass that when the Jews which dwelt by them came, they said to us 10 times, from all places whence ye shall return unto us, they will be upon you. So you get the idea that this opposition of Sanballat and Tobiah is beginning to take a toll on some of the people. Some of the people are aware of the threats, and now they're saying, this is too hard. It's too hard. We're trying to dig these rocks and everything out of all this rubble, and it's just too much. Well, they weren't saying that before, but now they're saying that, and you get the idea that this opposition is beginning to wear them down a little bit. You know, maybe we're on a fool's errand here. Maybe we can't do this. Maybe it is more than we can accomplish. So, again, Nehemiah's great leadership. Verse 13, therefore said I in the lower places behind the wall and on the higher places, I even set the people after their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and rose up and said to the nobles and to the rulers and to the rest of the people, be not ye afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. So Nehemiah is aware that there's a little undercurrent of discontent here. Maybe the people are wavering in their commitment a little bit. He doesn't ignore that. A good leader wouldn't ignore that. When there's a potential issue brewing, he meets it head on. And he calls them together and he says, don't be afraid of them. God is on our side. And you need to fight. And by the way, you need to fight for your brethren and your sons and your daughters and your wives and your houses. You are invested here. And you need to fight for what you've invested yourself into. I've always thought that's a pretty good spiritual principle too. The more invested we are in the work of God, the more we'll be determined to keep on going. If we're just very nominally involved in the work of God and some opposition comes up, we'll quit. We'll run off. We'll be the first one to run off. But if we've really heavily invested of ourselves, our lives, if we're committed, then if we have that investment, we want to protect the investment we've made in spiritual things, and we will fight. We'll do the spiritual fighting that needs to be done. And that's what Nehemiah was calling on them to do. Again, I think great leadership on his part. And it came to pass when our enemies heard that it was known unto us, and God had brought their counsel to naught, that we returned all of us to the wall, every one unto his work. So the enemies thought that we'll be on them in an instant. They won't even know until we're in amongst them, slaying them. And now come to find out their agenda, their plan was known. And so that kind of, the element of a surprise is taken off the table. A surprise attack is a very effective tool. And apparently they were thinking, we'll make a surprise attack on them and we'll have them before they even know we're coming. But now they realize that plan had been discovered and they were aware of it. And so in that process, notice how Nehemiah changes them into verse 15. We returned all of us to the wall, everyone to his work. And so he was able to squelch that little bit of grumbling and doubt and get them stirred up again and get them right back to work. It came to pass from, verse 16, it came to pass from that time forth that half of my servants wrought in the work, and the other half of them held both the spears and the shields and the bows and the habergeons, and the rulers were behind the house of Judah. They which builded on the wall, and they which bear burdens, with those that laded, every one with one of his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand held a weapon. For the builders, every one had his sword girded by his side, and so builded, and he that sounded the trumpet was by me. So, again, I think most of us can relate to the idea, this is some pretty heavy physical work. Sure would have been easier if you could put both hands to the work. But under these circumstances, you can't. Under these circumstances, you do what you can. And in this case, it is hold a weapon in one hand and work with the other. Now, that's not the most effective working arrangement. We understand that. But it's what the situation demands. Sometimes we have to do that. Sometimes the situation is such it's not ideal. Conditions are not just what we would want them to be perfectly. But you do what you can. You do what you have to do. And that's what they did. Worked with one hand and held the weapons in the other hand. I think, just try to picture that in your mind's eye. That'd be a challenge. Because again, we're talking about them digging out big boulder stones in order to restack them and build this great wall around the city of Jerusalem. It's been hard to do under the best of circumstances, and now they're working under a handicap, but they're doing it, and they're not giving up. Verse 19, and I said to the nobles and the rulers, to the rest of the people, the work is great and large, and we are separated upon the wall, one far from another. Remember, we said the whole circumference of that wall was probably over 1.5 miles long. In what place, therefore, ye hear the sound of the trumpet, resort ye thither unto us. Our God shall fight for us. So, again, pretty good plan. There's a big wall. They might attack us at any place along the wall. But we got a signal now. And if you hear the trumpet sound, you come rushing to where you hear the trumpet sound, and we'll repel the enemies at that place. Again, that would require everybody to be all in, fully devoted, because I'm working over here about this place, and the trumpet is sounding way down here. Oh man, I'm not under any threat. They're 1/2 mile from me. I'm not going down there. I might get killed if I went down there. I'm staying right here where I'm at. No, that was not what they did. And Nehemiah had a great plan, a defensive plan, and they engaged it. So if you hear the trumpet sound, you come rushing to where the trumpet is, and we'll fight. And I think, too, a really important expression there at the end of verse 20, our God shall fight for us. Nehemiah's confidence was not wholly on their skill as fighters and builders. Remember, when the threats first generated, his initial address was to pray about it. And still yet he's trusting God. God will fight for us. That sort of reminds you of Joshua and Caleb, maybe. When the spies came back from spying out the promised land, the 10 spies said, we could never take it. There's giants over there. And Joshua and Caleb said, we can do it very well because God is on our side. I always like the expression that Joshua and Caleb said, they are bread for us. It'll just be like eating a loaf of bread. It'll be easy not because we're such great people, not because our army is so overwhelmingly powerful. God will fight for us. And that's Nehemiah's expression here too. Really encouraging, I think, when you look at it that way. 21, so we labored in the work, and half of them held the spears from the rising of the morning till the stars appeared. Likewise, at the same time said I to the people, let every one with his servant lodge within Jerusalem, that in the night they may be a guard to us and labor on the day. So neither I, nor my brethren, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard which followed me, none of us put off our clothes, saving that everyone put them off for washing. This was not, an 8-hour day with several coffee breaks in between. They labored from the rising of the sun till the stars appeared. Long, hard work days. And then he also encouraged everybody to stay within the amount of the walls that they had finished and constructed, so that it would serve as a guard force. If at supper time everybody just scatters out, who knows where, to their tents and to their own little compounds. Well, now the fighting force is divided and diverse. It would make the work of Tobiah and Sanballat much easier. So Nehemiah encouraged them, and they did. They agreed. They stayed put in the city. And if you want to, I really think that last verse, if you want to talk about how committed they were to doing this, here's Nehemiah, he's the leader, and those who are with him, the principal leaders of this whole effort to rebuild the walls, we never even took our clothes off. We slept in our clothes. I thought it's kind of an interesting biblical footnote. Well, they did take them off to wash them. That's good, I guess. But they slept in their clothes. They didn't take that. They were ready and working, and at a moment's notice, ready to defend their cause. And you just got to be encouraged by what they did here. Any final thoughts or comments? Anybody? All right. So, rebuilding the walls. They're hard at it. They're getting the job done. And I think we can learn from them and be encouraged by what they accomplished. Thanks, everybody. Lord's willing, next Wednesday we'll take that next lesson.